Ideally, that would be, in a perfect world, fantastic. The biggest problem is, I guess I'm fairly unique that I'm talking about it because at the end of the day I don't have a brand to protect anymore. Whereas in most cases the end result isn't as drastic as ours. Economically, financially, certainly in the case of larger organisations, the dollar value is far greater. But you won't find, I don't think you'd find too often a CISO or a CIO or a CEO coming out saying, here's how it went horribly wrong. You know, the last thing they want to do is reiterate the fact that it went wrong and they got breached. So it's a difficult one. We can glean some of that information from media reports, but from personal experience, I know the media reports that were written about our situation were completely wrong. They were based on what the journalists were reading on the Whirlpool forums. So unless you've got people willing to come out and actually invest the time to say, here's everything we learned, unfortunately at this point in time I'm the only one I think that I know of that's out there doing that. So, and we are over time between presenting and everything else trying to put something together. It's a bit more sort of documented and meaningful because there are a lot of lessons to learn from that situation, going across a whole range of business concerns. Insurance is a really big one I talk about a lot. So yeah, unless we can get people that have been breached to actually stand up and say, yep, here's the case study and here's the information, it's very hard to, I think, to put all that together. And I certainly wouldn't want to do it based on just media reports.
Thanks, Alex. Anthony?
Yeah, I think one of the motivations for the bill that's before Federal Parliament for data breach notification laws is that. The main motivation is so that if there's a data breach there, people's welfare is put at risk, either financial or other welfare, they get warning so they can take steps to protect themselves. So if their credit card details have been compromised, they can change their credit card or whatever. So that's the main motivation, and so that you have to tell your customers about it, but you also have to tell the Federal Commissioner. So part of that, I think, is so that there is some kind of overview of patterns and what's been happening to businesses and what could be done to better protect them. Now, whether the Federal Commission is going to be resourced well enough to then produce some guidance out of that, I think would be an open question, but certainly one that I think the federal government should be asked. But that's one of the, I think, ideas that will be, because it won't be public as such, but it'll be to the Commissioner. It'll allow them to have a view of a bigger picture than they've got at the moment. So. Generally not, because generally the state laws apply to the government agencies in each of those states. So if you're contracting with a private organisation in Australia, they're either going to be, they generally will be covered by the Federal Act. So wherever they are in Australia, that will be the case. So, to an extent, the geographic location is important, and we got quite a lot of attention when we put our guidance out, because we did talk about the Patriot Act and other US national security laws that have been even more talked about in the last couple of weeks. And got a bit of flack from the Federal Trade representative in Washington saying that we were anti-Australia US trade. But our staff were thrilled that the Federal Trade representative in Washington was reading our guidance. But that wasn't our idea, in fact, and I think we've already touched on it, that in fact you do a holistic risk assessment. So if there's a reputable US provider that looks as though they tick all the security boxes, but there's that national security question, and you line them up against a local provider who looks as dodgy as, then we certainly wouldn't advise that you go with a local provider. But there are reputable local providers or overseas providers who have data centres in Australia, and so all of those things are things to take into account at the time you're choosing a provider, basically. So.
Yeah, it's certainly a consideration if you're unsure. In a lot of cases, providers would say we host in data centre XYZ, and most data centres have physical security-wise are very good. The issues with cybersecurity are more what you can't see, and that sort of leads to the next question of, well, how do you find out whether they're protected, whether there's security measures in place, and that's obviously a much harder answer to give. But look, if you're not sure, then absolutely you want to get a walkthrough of the physical environment to see what's in place and ask a lot of questions. But that's only one level of what you need to be considering in all of this. That is an excellent question, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. How best to answer that? That is a very good question. I think if there's two, in my mind, from our incident, there's two specific things that occurred, and both of those things that occurred that created the opportunity and created the delays in the recovery time, and both of those relate to spending the time as a team looking at disaster planning in a broader context. We always, and most companies still have this theory that cybersecurity or online security is an IT issue, and we probably were guilty of that as well, saying when there's a breach, our IT guys will have to recover the services, and when it's back up and running, everything else takes place, gets back into shape, and away we go. I think the very first step, if you've got a process in place, to consider the broader impacts of if you have any event that creates an outage or a breach of data that creates the inability to trade for an extended period of time, how would the business deal with that? How do you pull the right resources in to recover the various, to communicate with the media? How do you pull in the necessary resources to fill the breach if you haven't got enough people technically to be able to restore the services in a timely manner? So I think you would know that you are reasonably well covered if you are diligent enough to have a process in place every month, every quarter, that goes through looking at risks of the business. And I know for a small business, one or two men band, that's a difficult thing to do, and that's where it's good to go to your providers or to engage some external consultancy if budget permits. But you will know if you are starting to get to the point where you're very proactive in your planning and approach in terms of, if disaster strikes, this is what I'm going to have to do, this is what they're going to do, this is how we're going to communicate it, and you're starting to put together a documented set of processes, because that'll help you identify the risks and also prepare you for how you're going to deal with them if or when it does happen.
Troy, these are the kind of things that keep you up at night?
Yeah, they do. So I agree with everything that was just said then. The next step, so important to document. The next step though is test it. To be honest, how do you know if it works? Test it. So if you've got a backup and a storage disaster recovery plan, pull the plug out of your main storage unit and see what happens, and then execute your plan and test it and see if it works. You'll find out pretty quickly what does and doesn't work, and then you can make changes to it. So that testing cycle is just critical, honestly.
Is that something that's commonplace in your own business? Are you running these pre-tests? Have you got a plan?
Yeah, we do, and definitely I agree with all those comments. It's a big thing to simulate a disaster, and you're not always going to get it right each time, and it's quite a huge business disruption as well. What's interesting to me is that every time we've done that, we've found something new. We've found something that we either need to update our documentation in a particular way or change our processes in a particular way. I can't say that all the times we've done one of these tests, which we've been doing for years, has been entirely flawless. There's always been something that we can continue doing, which shows just what would be the case if we hadn't been doing this testing. We'd be in a situation where our recovery time would be extended, and potentially would be some data at risk as well.